After 35 years of marriage, I was holding Emily's hand when, under anesthesia, she whispered, "Where's my Larry?" My world fell apart. I searched online and found photos of them together, smiling and looking happy, as if I had never existed. When she woke up, she pretended she didn't know any Larry and said I was pansexual, but her eyes betrayed the lie. That night, I secretly took her phone and read her text messages, screaming at what I saw. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, sharp and cold like the truth I didn't yet know. I sat beside Emily's bed, holding her limp hand, her skin cool despite the blanket around her. The monitors hummed steadily, matching the rhythm of my thoughts. Calm, routine, just another day. She was going in for knee surgery. It wasn't life-threatening, but I'd insisted on being there. 35 years of marriage does that to you. You hold hands through the small stuff, not just the storms. The anesthetist had just left, and Emily's eyes fluttered under the weight of the anesthetic. Her lips moved, barely a whisper, and I leaned closer, expecting some groggy endearment. Instead, her voice, soft as a sigh, cut me to the core. "Where's my Larry?" I froze. My thumb, which had been tracing circles on her knuckles, stopped. Larry. The name hung in the air, sounding foreign like a wrong note in a familiar song. My heart thudded loudly enough to drown out the monitors. I glanced at the nurse, who was scribbling on a chart and seemed oblivious. Had I misheard? Emily's face was expressionless and she was breathing evenly, but that name, Larry, echoed in my mind. "Who's Larry?" I muttered more to myself than to her. She didn't stir. The nurse looked up, her pen pausing. "Everything okay, Mr. Miller?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yeah, fine," but it wasn't. I kept holding Emily's hand, but it felt different now. It was as if I were gripping a stranger's. My mind raced. Larry. I didn't know anyone called Larry. A colleague, a cousin I'd forgotten. But no, her soft, intimate tone said something else. Something I didn't want to name. The nurse left and the room grew quieter, filled only with the drip of the IV and my uneven breathing. I stared at Emily. Her gray hair fanned across the pillow and her face was peaceful under the oxygen mask. I thought of our 30th anniversary, how she'd laughed and squeezed my hand as we danced in our living room to an old Sinatra tune. Emily wouldn't say another man's name like that. Would she? I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy. The screen glowed harshly in the dim room. I typed Larry Chicago into Google. Results flooded in. LinkedIn profiles, obituaries, and random blogs. Desperately scrolling, I switched to Facebook. My thumb shook as I typed Larry into Emily's friend list. There he was, Larry Noah Wilson. His profile picture showed a man in his late 50s with a cocky grin, standing too close to a woman in a blue dress. I zoomed in. My stomach lurched. It was Emily. They were at a picnic. Autumn leaves were scattered behind them and she was smiling widely while his arm brushed hers. The caption read, "Perfect day with great company." Posted a year ago. I scrolled further. More photos, coffee shops, a jazz club. Their faces lit by candlelight. Each image was like a blade, carving away the life I thought I knew. There was Emily, my Emily, smiling like she hadn't in years with him. I gripped the phone so hard that my knuckles turned white. The room spun and the antiseptic smell choked me. I wanted to shake her awake and demand answers, but she was asleep, lost in a dream that had called his name. The doctor stepped in, his clipboard crisp against his coat. "Surgery's about to start," he said. "Mr. Miller, she'll be fine." I nodded, barely hearing him. "Good, thanks." My voice sounded hollow. Not mine. He left and I sat there, staring at the photo on my screen. Emily and Larry were laughing as if I had never existed. My chest burned. It was a mix of grief and something sharper, maybe anger. Or maybe it was the first spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Betrayal. The door to the room was open, revealing a bright and bustling corridor beyond. Nurses passed by, their shoes squeaking on the tiles. That open door felt like my life now. exposed and out of my control. I stood up, feeling unsteady on my feet, and slipped the phone into my pocket. The monitors kept humming, indifferent. I walked out, the door clicking softly behind me, and headed down the corridor. The weight of that name, Larry, pulled me towards something I wasn't ready to face. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly ahead of me, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I stood outside Emily's recovery room, my hand on the door, hesitating. The photo of her with Larry was still burned into my mind, but I needed answers. Not from a screen, but from her. I pushed the door open, the hinges creaking, and stepped into the dimly lit room. Rain tapped the window in a soft, relentless rhythm. Emily was awake and propped up on pillows. Her face was pale, but she looked alert. The bandage on her knee peeped out from under the blanket, and 4 lines snaked their way from her arm. She smiled, weak but familiar. "Jack, you didn't have to stay." I forced a smile, my lips tight. I wanted to. I sat down beside her, and the chair scraped against the floor. Her hand reached for mine, but I kept mine on my knee, my fingers curled up. "How are you feeling?" "Tired." "Sore?" Her voice was soft, but her eyes darted to mine, searching. "Everything okay?" I swallowed the question that had been on my mind since morning, clawing its way out. "Emily, who's Larry?" Her face didn't change, but her fingers twitched as she clutched the blanket. "Larry," she laughed, a brittle sound. "I don't know any Larry." "Why?" "You said his name before the surgery, under the anesthesia." I kept my voice steady, but my pulse thumped in my ears. "You asked where he was." Her eyes widened for a moment, then narrowed. "Jack, I was out of it. I was probably mumbling nonsense. You know how those drugs mess with you." She reached for my hand again, but I leaned back, my chair creaking. "Nonsense," I said, sharper than I meant to. "You said, 'Where's my Larry?'" Clear as day. She sighed, her lips pursing. "You're reading too much into it. I don't know any Larry." "Maybe I meant Laurie, the nurse from my book club." Her voice was smooth and practiced, but her fingers kept twisting the blanket, betraying her. I stared at her, the woman I'd built a life with, and saw a stranger. I thought of a fight we'd had years ago after she'd hidden a credit card bill. She'd promised to be honest. Her eyes were wet with tears. That Emily was gone. This one was lying, and I knew it. "Okay," I said, standing up. "Rest up." My voice was flat, but inside, anger coiled tightly, ready to snap. She nodded, her smile faltering, and I left the room, the door swinging shut behind me. The drive home was a blur. The rain smeared the windscreen, and the thumping of the wipers matched my racing heartbeat. Our house loomed ahead, its faded exterior glistening in the storm. Inside, the familiar smell of old wood and coffee used to ground me, but now it felt like a museum of a life I didn't recognize. Now, however, it felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. I sank into the same chair at the kitchen table where we had shared countless dinners, where Emily had once carved her initials into the wood while laughing. Now it was just a surface for my laptop, the glow of which cast shadows on the walls. I opened Facebook again, my fingers steady this time. I clicked on Emily's profile. Her friend list was a maze of names. There he was, Larry Noah Wilson. I hesitated, then opened his page. His life spilled out in pixels. A financial advisor's office in downtown Chicago, posts about golf and wine tastings. There was a photo of him and Emily at a cafe. Her comment below said it was the best day and was dated 6 months ago. My jaw clenched. I clicked on the About section. An address blinked back, a sleek all-glass building in the Loop oozing ambition. I jotted it down, my pen digging into the paper. The rain grew louder, hammering the roof. I leaned back and the chair creaked under my weight. What was once a place of warmth now held my unraveling. I closed the laptop with a final click and stared at the window, where rain streaked the glass like tears. Larry was real, and he was close. I'd find him tomorrow. I'd watch him. I'd figure out just how deep this betrayal ran. The cafe was alive with noise. Clinking cups, the hiss of the espresso machine and laughter from a group in the corner. I sat by the window with a newspaper spread before me. My untouched coffee was cooling in my mug. My eyes weren't on the headlines, though. They were fixed on the door, waiting for Larry Noah Wilson. It was the address on his Facebook page that had led me here. It was a trendy spot in the suburbs. It was all wood paneling and oversized windows. The kind of place Emily would have loved. My stomach twisted at the thought. I'd never done this before, followed someone. Played detective. At 62, I was an engineer, not a spy. But the image of Emily's smile in those photos, her hand brushing his, had driven me there. I shifted in my seat, the chair scraping softly, and checked my phone. There was a note with Larry's office address and a screenshot of his profile. I'd memorized his face, sharp jaw, smug grin, and eyes that looked right through you. The door chimed, and there he was. Larry strode in, his suit crisp and his hair slicked back. He scanned the room, his gaze skimming past me, before heading to a table at the back. My grip tightened on the mug. The ceramic was hot against my palm. I lifted the newspaper higher and peeked over the edge. He sat down and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen quickly. Then he glanced at the door, looking nervous, as though he were expecting someone. I took a slow breath to steady myself. My heart pounded, but I wasn't there to confront him. Not yet, at least. I needed to know who he was and what he was hiding. I remembered how Emily had started keeping her phone face down and how her fingers had been quick to lock the screen. Larry's phone was out now, its screen glowing. He typed something, then slid the phone into his pocket, his eyes darting towards the door again. I stood casually and wandered towards the counter, passing his table. I pretended to search for sugar, my ears pricked up. He was talking to a man in a gray suit. Their voices were low. "We need to wrap this up fast," Larry said, his tone clipped. "No loose ends." The other man nodded and muttered something I couldn't catch. Larry's phone buzzed and he pulled it out, swiping quickly with his thumb. He frowned, then tucked it away sharply. My pulse quickened. Loose ends. This wasn't just about an affair. I thought of Emily, her nervous fingers in hospital, and her lies. What were they hiding? I grabbed a sugar packet and returned to my seat, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone and jotted down a note. "Larry deal. It's something bigger than Emily." My fingers were shaking, but I kept a blank expression on my face. Just another guy reading the news. Larry's companion left, but he stayed, sipping an espresso and glancing at his phone every few seconds. I watched the cafe's warmth fade, replaced by a cold certainty. This man wasn't just a fling. He was trouble. I thought of our house, the kitchen table where I'd found his address, and the life I thought was mine. A memory flashed, Emily tucking her phone under a napkin at dinner, her smile too bright. She was part of this, whatever it was. The sun broke through the clouds outside, casting shadows across the cafe. Larry stood up, slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, and left, the door chiming behind him. I waited, then folded the newspaper. My decision was made. I needed more than photos and suspicions. Emily's phone was still at the hospital in her bag. If there were answers, they would be there. I stepped outside into the sharp autumn air and headed for my car. The cafe's noise faded, replaced by the crunch of leaves under my feet. I glanced at my phone. The note about Larry was still glowing on the screen. Whatever he was hiding, I would find it. And when I did, I'd make sure he and Emily were held accountable for it. The hospital was quieter at night, the hum of machines softening like a slowing heartbeat. I slipped into Emily's room and the door eased shut behind me. Rain battered the window, a steady drumbeat matching the pulse in my temples. Emily slept, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin blanket. Her face was calm and almost innocent. But I knew better now. The phone on her bedside table glinted under the dim light, a small black rectangle holding secrets she would never reveal. I hesitated, my hand hovering over it. The room felt smaller. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and betrayal. If I was wrong, if this was all a misunderstanding, I would be violating her trust. But then I saw her in that photo with Larry. Her smile was brighter than it had been for years. My fingers closed around the cold, smooth phone. She stirred, her hand twitching, and I froze, my breath caught in my throat. She didn't wake up. I tapped the screen. No passcode. Emily never bothered with one. She said it was too much hassle. Her carelessness worked in my favor. The Messages app glowed, and there it was. Larry Noah Wilson. His name was at the top of her recent chats. My thumb trembled as I opened the thread. The screen burned my eyes. Each word was like a fresh wound. Larry, I miss you already. When's the next getaway? Emily, soon. Jack's clueless as usual. Larry, poor old bore. I bet he's still tinkering with his gadgets. Emily, LOL, always. You're the spark I need. My chest stopped tightening as if someone had sucked the air from the room. Clueless. Boring, 35 years. And this was what she thought of me. I scrolled further, my jaw clenched. The messages stretched back years. There were hotel bookings, late-night calls, and her laughing at my predictable routines. One from last month hit me the hardest. Larry will never suspect. He's too busy playing the good husband. Emily, good, let him. My vision blurred, not from tears but from hot, sharp rage. I wanted to scream and shake her awake, demanding, why me? Why us? I thought of our last anniversary, how I'd brought her roses, how she'd smiled thinly and said, "You're sweet, Jack." Sweet, as if I were a child, not her husband. This memory was twisted and poisoned by her words on the screen. I kept reading, unable to stop. A recent message caught my eye. Larry, we need to be careful with those papers. Keep them safe. Papers, my pulse quickened. This wasn't just an affair. There was something else, something bigger. I scrolled through, but the details were vague and buried in coded language. My engineer's mind kicked in, piecing together the fragments, but I needed more. The phone nearly slipped from my grip. My knuckles were white. I wanted to hurl it against the wall and let it shatter like my trust had, but I didn't. I put it back on the table exactly as it was, my hands shaking. Emily murmured something in her sleep, her voice soft. For a moment I saw the woman I'd loved. Then I remembered her words, clueless bore. That woman was gone. The rain grew louder, pounding against the window. The dim light in the room cast shadows across Emily's face, hiding her lies in the darkness. But the phone's light had revealed enough. I stood up, clenched my fists, and walked to the door. The corridor beyond was silent. The hospital was asleep. I stepped out and the door clicked shut behind me. The rain's rhythm followed me, urging me to think, to plan, to act. The park was deserted at dawn, the air crisp with the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. I sat on a damp wooden bench, my breath visible in the chill, and watched the leaves drift down, red and gold, piling at my feet like fragments of the life I'd lost. Red and gold leaves drifted down and piled at my feet like fragments of the life I had lost. My notebook rested on my lap, its metal spiral cold against my fingers. I had come there to think, to make sense of the jagged pieces that Emily's betrayal had left behind. 35 years. I'd given her everything. My time, my dreams, my trust. I remembered a moment years ago when I'd turned down a promotion that would have meant moving to Seattle. Emily said she couldn't leave her friends or her routine. So I stayed and built our life in this quiet suburb. She'd kissed me then and called me her rock. Now I saw it, her rock, her bore, her fool. I opened the notebook and began to write, expose them but smartly. My engineer's mind took over, mapping out the problem like a circuit diagram. Emily and Larry thought I was predictable and weak. They'd underestimated me, and that was their mistake. I wouldn't scream or beg. I would dismantle their lies piece by piece until they had nowhere left to hide. I wrote, Larry's papers, find out what they are. The message I'd seen hinted at something more than just their affair. Something that made Larry nervous. I jotted down ideas. Follow him again. Check his office. Use their arrogance against them. My pen moved faster and the ink smudged under a stray raindrop. I thought of Emily's laughter in those messages and her casual cruelty. She'd never see this coming. A memory surfaced. Emily's voice was sharp. "You're so predictable, Jack," she'd said years ago, always playing it safe. We'd been arguing about where to go on holiday. I wanted a quiet cabin and she wanted Paris. I'd given in as I always did. So predictable. The word stung, but it also fueled me. I'd show her that I could be unpredictable. I'd show them both. The park stirred around me. A jogger passed, her trainers crunching leaves underfoot. In the distance, a child laughed as they chased a dog. The normality of it all felt distant, like a forgotten language. I closed my eyes and let the sounds fade. I saw our kitchen table, where we'd shared coffee and dreams. Now it was my war room where I planned this. I wrote, "Start with Larry, he's the weak link." My fingers tightened around the notebook, the spiral digging into my palm. I wasn't the man they thought I was. Not anymore. I thought of the hospital and Emily's lies. Larry's smug grin. They'd built their secret world thinking I'd never notice, but I had, and I was going to tear it down. The sky lightened as the clouds parted to reveal a sliver of blue. I stood up and tucked the notebook into my jacket. Leaves clung to my shoes, soft and fleeting like the past I was letting go of. I walked towards the park's exit, my steps firm as the weight of my plan settled in my chest. The game was on, and I was ready to play. The mailbox stood under a flickering street lamp, its metal rusted and its flag creaking in the evening breeze. I clutched the envelope, its edges sharp against my fingers. Inside were printed photos. There was Emily and Larry at that picnic, their smiles frozen in betrayal. There was no note or signature, just the truth, raw and undeniable. I had addressed it to Sophia Wilson, Larry's wife. I'd written her name in block letters to keep my handwriting anonymous. I glanced around. The street was quiet, the suburban houses glowing with warm light. My car waited a block away, engine off. The keys were heavy in my pocket. This was it, my first move. My heart raced, but not with fear, something alive. I lifted the mailbox flag, the metal squeaking as I did so, and hesitated. This was my one last chance to back out. Then I thought of Emily's messages, clueless. Boring. I dropped the envelope in with a final thud and lowered the flag. I crossed the street and slipped behind a row of bushes near Larry's house. Its modern facade loomed before me, all glass and sharp angles, the kind of place that screamed money. Light spilled from the living room and I crouched down, breathing shallowly. I'd found Sophia's name on Larry's Facebook profile, which was full of pictures of her at charity events, looking forced and unnatural. She deserved to know. Minutes passed, my knees aching against the damp ground. Then the front door opened and Sophia appeared with the envelope in her hand. She tore it open, her face lit by the porch light. The photos fluttered out and she froze, her mouth parting. I leaned closer, the branches scratching my jacket. She stormed inside, slamming the door behind her. Her voice cut through the night, sharp and raw. "Larry, get down here." I edged forward and peered through the window. Larry appeared, his tie loose and holding a glass of wine. Sophia thrust the photos at him, her hands trembling. "What is this? Who is she?" Larry's face drained of color. "Sophia, it's not what you think, not what you think." She threw the photos onto the coffee table, one of them sliding to the floor. "You're sneaking around with some woman and I'm supposed to believe it's nothing." I bit back a smile. The thrill of it was electric. My plan was working. Larry stammered and raised his hands, but Sophia wasn't listening. "You've humiliated me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I won't let this go, Larry, I won't." He grabbed his phone, his fingers fumbling, and dialed. I pulled out my phone and started recording the chaos. The audio was muffled but clear enough. "Emily, we've got a problem," he said in a low, panicked voice. My pulse surged. He was calling her. The game was escalating just as I'd hoped. Sophia snatched a photo and tore it in half. "Who's Emily? Tell me." Larry turned away and muttered something into the phone, but I couldn't hear what he said. I didn't need to. The seeds had been planted and they were sprouting fast. I slipped back into the shadows, my keys jingling softly. The night air was cool and the street lamp flickered like my resolve, steady but ready to flare. I reached my car and slid into the driver's seat. The engine purred to life and I pulled away. Larry's house shrank in my rear-view mirror. Emily was probably at the hospital getting that call now, her lies unraveling. I gripped the wheel as the road stretched towards the hospital, where my next move awaited. The envelope was gone, but its truth remained. As did I. The front door creaked as Emily stepped into the house, her suitcase thumping against the floorboards. Sunlight streamed through the living room window, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. The familiar smell of coffee lingered, but it felt wrong, like a stage set for a play that I no longer believed in. I stood in the kitchen doorway with my arms crossed, watching her. She smiled. "Too bright, too rehearsed," she said. "Home sweet home," she said, her voice light, but her eyes flicked away from mine. I nodded, my jaw tight, and asked, "Need help with that?" I gestured towards the suitcase, my tone flat. She shook her head and dragged herself towards the stairs, her movements jerky as if she were trying to outrun something. I knew about Larry's call last night and the photos that Sophia had seen. I knew about the cracks in their secret world. She thought she could act normal, but her trembling hands gave her away. She put the kettle on. The click of the stove was loud in the quiet. "You look tired, Jack," she said, rummaging for tea bags. "Everything okay?" "Fine," I replied, leaning against the counter. My eyes caught the hallway mirror, reflecting her forced calm and her fingers twisting the tea bag string. That mirror has seen us laugh, argue, and make up. Now it showed a lie. "You seem jumpy," I added in a low voice. She laughed, a brittle sound just like the hospital and all those machines. But her phone buzzed on the counter and she snatched it up, swiping the screen with her thumb before I could see anything. I thought of her messages with Larry and her mocking words about me. My chest burned, but I kept a blank expression on my face. The kettle whistled and she poured water. Steam curled around her like a veil. I remembered a night years ago, after an argument about money, when she had hugged me and promised that we would always be honest with each other. But that Emily was a ghost now, replaced by this stranger who couldn't meet my gaze. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. "Meet me at the cafe on Elm at 2 p.m. 2 p.m. I know what they did. Sophia. My pulse quickened. Sophia, Larry's wife. I slipped the phone away, my mind racing. "I'm heading out," I said, grabbing my jacket. Emily's head snapped up and her eyes narrowed. "So soon?" Her voice was too casual, her fingers tightening on the mug. "Where to?" "Errands," I replied, already at the door. The mirror caught my reflection as I left. Harder, sharper, not the man she thought she knew. The cafe was bustling, the air thick with the scents of vanilla and fresh bread. I spotted Sophia at a table in the corner, her face drawn and her nails tapping the rim of a coffee cup. The window beside her acted like a mirror, reflecting our shared determination. She looked up as I sat down. Her eyes were fierce yet tired. "Jack right," she said in a low voice. "They humiliated us, both of them." I nodded, my throat tightening. "What do you know? Larry's been lying for years," she said, leaning closer. "Not just with her. He's hiding things, money deals. I want him to pay." Her words lit something in me, a spark of possibility. She slid a USB drive across the table, her fingers brushing the wood. "This has proof, financial records." "Use it," she said. I took the drive, feeling its weight in my palm. "Why me?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Because you're not like them," she said. "You're smart and you're angry." She paused, her eyes locked on mine, like me. The cafe's noise faded, and the mirror-like window showed us as allies in a war that we had not chosen. I pocketed the drive, my fingers brushing the rough fabric of my jacket. "We'll make them regret this," I said. She nodded, a grim smile flickering across her face. I left the cafe, the USB drive and a quiet promise in my pocket. The street was bright and the autumn wind was sharp. I headed home, the weight of Sophia's words and the drive pulling me forward towards a truth I was ready to confront. The bar was a haze of smoke and dim light, the kind of place where deals are made in whispers. I crouched behind a parked van across the street. The asphalt was cold under my knees. Larry sat at a table at the back of the bar, his suit rumpled and his face taut, as he slid an envelope to a man in a leather jacket. The man, lean and sharp-eyed, a private detective if I had to guess, pocketed it, nodding. My stomach twisted. They were coming for me. I had followed Larry here after seeing him leave his office with his phone pressed to his ear and his voice sounding clipped. The USB drive that Sophia had given me burned in my pocket. I still hadn't opened the secrets about his finances that it contained. I needed to know what he was planning and how close he was to discovering my plan. The bar's neon sign buzzed, casting shadows that hit me as I strained to hear. "Find out who sent those photos," Larry said, his voice carrying through the open window. "I don't care what it costs, do it fast." The detective leaned back, his fingers drumming the table. "Got a description?" "Anything. Older guy, probably," Larry muttered. "Someone with a grudge," my pulse spiked. "Older guy, me." I shifted, feeling the cold metal of the van against my shoulder. The shadows felt thinner, as if they couldn't protect me for much longer. I slipped away, my shoes silent on the pavement, and drove home, gripping the wheel tightly. The house was dark when I arrived. The only sound was the hum of the fridge. Emily was in the living room with a glass of wine, her eyes flicking to me as I entered. "Late night," she said, her voice soft but edged like a blade wrapped in silk. "Had things to do," I replied, hanging up my jacket. The USB drive stayed in my pocket, its weight grounding me. She stood up slowly and deliberately and crossed to the coffee table, picking up a book. But her eyes lingered on my jacket, searching. "You've been acting strange, Jack," she said, setting the glass down, "so suspicious. It's not like you." Her tone was pitying, but her fingers twitched, betraying her. I thought of a time she'd lied about a girl's night out. Her smile had been too bright and her excuses too smooth. She was playing that game again. "Maybe I've got reasons," I said, my voice low. Her eyes narrowed, but she laughed and brushed it off. "You're imagining things," she said, turning away. But I caught her glance at my desk, where my laptop sat with its lid half open. She was looking for something, proof maybe that I knew. I stepped closer, blocking her view, and she froze, her smile faltering. "Get some rest," I said, my tone final. She nodded and retreated upstairs, but the air felt charged, as though a storm were about to break. I waited until her footsteps had faded before checking the desk. A drawer was open, papers shifted. She'd been snooping. My blood ran cold. Later, as I locked the front door, I saw a car parked down the street with its headlights off and a shadow inside. Maybe it was the detective or someone he'd hired. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. I slipped the USB drive into my sock, feeling its edges against my skin, and took out my phone. Sophia's number lit up on the screen. I dialed, my voice low. "We've got trouble," I said as she picked up. My eyes were on the car outside, its shadow looming like an unavoidable threat. Larry's office was a mess of papers and coffee cups, the kind of chaos that screamed panic. I sat at his desk, the glow of the monitors harsh against the darkening evening. Sophia stood by the door, arms crossed and eyes darting to the hallway. She'd got us in with a spare key that Larry hadn't bothered to hide. His arrogance was our advantage. The USB drive was plugged in, its files revealing secrets about offshore accounts, fake invoices, and deals that could ruin him. My fingers flew over the keyboard, my old engineering instincts kicking in. I'd solved problems like this before: circuits, systems, puzzles with clean solutions. This was messier, but the logic held. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a spreadsheet. "He's been siphoning money for years. This could send him to jail." Sophia leaned in, her breath catching. "That's enough to bury him," she said, her voice trembling with something like hope. And her, she meant Emily. I nodded, my jaw tight. The files mentioned a joint account. Emily's name was tied to Larry's schemes. She wasn't just cheating, she was complicit. I copied the files, the progress bar ticked slowly. My mind flashed back to a late night at work years ago when I was debugging a design and Emily called, annoyed that I'd missed dinner. I thought I was building a life for us. Now, I was dismantling hers. This thought steadied me, and my hands were steady as I worked. A noise in the hall made us freeze. Sophia pressed a finger to her lips and crept to the door. "Guard," she whispered. I quickly removed the USB drive and shoved it into my pocket, and we ducked behind a filing cabinet. The guard's torch swept the room, its beam missing us by inches. My heart hammered, but I kept still. The weight of the documents in my mind was greater than the risk. When he left, we exhaled and slipped out through a back exit. The night air was sharp and the city lights were blurring as we headed to the park for cover. We sat on a bench, the wood was slick with dew, and reviewed the files on my phone. "We've got him," said Sophia, her voice fierce. "We need an attorney, someone discreet." I nodded and started dialing a contact I'd found online, a lawyer known for taking down white-collar criminals. "I've got what you need," I told him, keeping my voice low. "Can we meet tomorrow?" He agreed and I hung up. The plan was coming together. A rustle in the bushes made me turn around. A shadow moved, quickly and deliberately. Emily. I caught a glimpse of her silhouette and her scarf catching the moonlight before she disappeared behind a tree. My stomach dropped. She was following me and putting the pieces together. I didn't let on, keeping my voice steady as I spoke to Sophia. "We need to move fast," I said. "They're closing in." Sophia didn't notice Emily's eyes on the phone screen, but I could feel her presence, her suspicion weighing me down. I remembered her in the hospital, her lies as smooth as glass. She thought she knew me, she thought she could outsmart me. She was wrong. I stood up, the truth of the documents burning in my pocket, and headed for my car. Sophia was at my side. The park was quiet, but Emily's shadow lingered in my mind as a reminder that the game wasn't over yet. Glancing back, I saw that her figure had been swallowed by the trees. I drove towards the lawyer's office. The night stretched out before me like a challenge I was ready to face. The morning sun glinted off the glass facade of Larry's office building, its sleek lines a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding below. I stood half hidden by a newsstand across the street, my breath visible in the October chill. Police cars lined the curb, their lights flashing silently. A crowd of onlookers murmured behind me. Larry emerged, his hands cuffed, his tailored suit wrinkled and his face pale, as an officer guided him towards a police car. The clink of the handcuffs echoed sharply and finally, like the end of a lie. I didn't move, didn't blink. The USB drive that Sophia had given me, with its files meticulously handed over to the lawyer, had done its work. Offshore accounts, faked invoices. Larry's empire of deceit crumbled before our eyes. His desperate eyes scanned the crowd, but they didn't find me. I was just another face in the crowd, a stranger watching his downfall. My chest swelled, not with joy but with something heavier. Hard and cold justice. I turned away, the hum of the city fading as I drove home. The house loomed ahead, its faded exterior a reminder of the life I'd once clung to. Inside, Emily waited, her suitcase by the door and her eyes red-rimmed. She stood up as I came in, her hands twisting together and her voice trembling. "Jack, we need to talk." I put my keys on the counter. The noise was loud in the silence. "Talk," I said, my tone flat. The kitchen smelled of old coffee and the air was thick with her panic. She stepped closer, her scarf slipping from her shoulder as she rushed out her words. "I made a mistake," she said, tears brimming. "Larry was a fantasy. We can fix this, Jack. We can go back." I stared at her, the woman I had loved for 35 years, and could only see her messages with Larry. Her laughter at my expense. Clueless bore. I thought of the roses I'd given her, the nights I'd stayed up solving her problems, and the life I'd built for us. "Fix this," I said, my voice low and steady. "You broke it, Emily." Years ago her face crumpled, but I felt no pity. "Please," she whispered, reaching for me. "I'm sorry. Your chance ended when you lied, when you chose him," I said, stepping back. I moved to the bedroom and pulled a duffel bag from the wardrobe. I packed shirts, books, and a photo of our kids, but nothing of hers. She followed me, her voice rising in desperation. "This isn't you, Jack." "You don't walk away." I zipped the bag, my hand steady. "You don't know me," I said, meeting her gaze. "You never did." Her sob caught in her throat, but I walked past, the floorboards creaking under my weight. My phone buzzed. "Sophia." I stepped outside, the cool air sharp against my skin, and answered. "We did it," she said, her voice warm and triumphant. "He's done." "Thanks to you," I said, glancing back at the house. Emily stood in the doorway, her silhouette small and broken. "I owe you." "You owe yourself," Sophia said. Sophia said, "You're free now." I hung up. The word echoed. Free. The cruiser's lights had faded, but the clinking of the handcuffs lingered in my mind as a symbol of the end of Larry's life and my own. I slid into my car, with the duffel bag on the passenger seat, and pulled away. The house shrank in my rearview mirror. A new apartment waited for me, its keys jangling in my pocket like a promise of something new. I hadn't felt a life that was mine in years. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Its bare walls glowed under the evening light. I stood in the living room with a cardboard box at my feet and its contents spilling onto the hardwood. Books, a coffee mug, and a framed photo of my kids from years ago. I placed the photo on a shelf, lingering on the glass as I touched it. Their smiles were a quiet anchor. Emily's face wasn't here. It didn't belong anymore. I moved to the window and pressed my palm against the cool glass. The quiet, unfamiliar suburb stretched out below, a blank slate. A week had passed since Larry's arrest, and since I'd left Emily standing in our old house while I walked away, her pleas fading behind me. The weight of those 35 years had gone, replaced by something lighter and more fragile, yet still real. Hope, perhaps. The doorbell buzzed, and when I opened it, I found Sophia. She held 2 coffee cups in her hands and smiled warmly. "Housewarming gift," she said, handing me one. The steam curled upwards and the aroma grounded me. "Looks like you're settling in," she said. "Trying," I said, gesturing to the boxes. "It's different." We sat on the sofa, the only piece of furniture I had bought so far. The fabric was stiff under us. She glanced at the window. The sunset was painting the sky red and gold. "You deserve this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "A fresh start." I sipped the coffee, its bitterness was sharp. "Didn't think I'd get here," I admitted. "Not after everything." I thought of Emily's messages and her calling me predictable. Her betrayal had sliced through decades of trust. Sophia's hand brushed mine. It was a fleeting touch, but it sparked something. Warmth. Possibility. "Let's walk," she suggested, standing up. We headed to the nearby park. The air was crisp and the leaves crunched under our shoes. The park was alive with the hustle and bustle of dusk, kids chasing a ball and couples strolling. Sophia laughed at a squirrel darting up a tree. Her cheerfulness pulled me out of my thoughts. "You're quieter than usual," she said, nudging me. "Just thinking," I replied, thinking about how she made me feel invisible. The words slipped out, raw but true. I remembered Emily's dismissive glances and her laughter with Larry. Sophia stopped, her eyes meeting mine. "You're not invisible," she said, her voice steady. "Not to me." She rested her hand on my arm for longer this time, and I felt a stirring, a flicker of something I hadn't allowed myself to imagine before. Not love, not yet, but a door opening. We walked on, the sky darkening and the park's lights glowing softly. Back at the apartment, I noticed an envelope on the counter that had been slipped through the letterbox while we were out. Emily's neat, familiar handwriting stared back at me. My stomach tightened, but I didn't open it. I slid it into a drawer and heard the wood scrape shut, locking her words away. "You okay?" Sophia asked, watching me. "Yeah," I said, managing a smile. "Fancy going to a charity event tomorrow, something local." "I could use the company," she grinned, her eyes bright. "You're on." I walked her to the door. The window behind me framed the night sky, its stars faint but clear. I left the envelope in the drawer, unopened, as I turned to the window. The world beyond it was wide and waiting. The community center buzzed with life, its hall filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm scent of baked goods. Strings of lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the crowd. I stood near a table laden with pies, a glass of cider in hand. Sophia stood beside me, her dress catching the light as she chatted with a volunteer. The charity event was for a local youth program. I donated a large sum of my savings, a decision that felt right, like shedding another piece of the past. Earlier, in the quiet of my apartment, I had found Emily's letter again. Its envelope was creased from sitting in the drawer. I tore it open, the paper crinkling under my fingers. Her words spilled out, apologies, regrets, a plea for forgiveness. "I was wrong, Jack. I see that now. But they were just hollow words after years of lies." I skimmed through them, then set them aside. The weight of her guilt was no longer mine to carry. The silence of the apartment had felt peaceful, the air tinged with the scent of tea and bread, their steam curling towards the open window. The noise of the crowd was a welcome contrast. Sophia turned to me, smiling widely. "You're a hit," she said, nodding towards a group of organizers who had thanked me for the donation. "They're calling you the hero of the night." I laughed, finding it easier than I had in years. I was hardly just doing what I could. But their gratitude warmed me, reminding me of who I could be without Emily's shadow. I thought of her criticism, how she'd scoffed at my generosity and called it naive. Standing there now, I felt anything but. Sophia raised her glass, her eyes sparkling. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice soft but clear. I clinked my glass against hers. The words "to us" were bold and unexpected. "To us," I added, the words bold and unexpected. Her smile deepened and we sipped, the moment light yet charged. The band struck up a slow tune and she tilted her head. "Dance?" she asked, her tone playful. I hesitated, then took her hand. Her fingers were warm in mine. We moved onto the dance floor and the music wrapped around us as we swayed, her laughter soft. The crowd blurred and the lights dimmed to a golden haze. For the first time in decades, I felt seen, not as a husband or a fool, but as myself. "You're stronger than they ever knew," Sophia said, her voice close and her breath brushing my cheek. I thought of Emily's letter and how its words were fading in my mind, becoming powerless. "So are you," I replied, my voice steady. She squeezed my hand and I knew that, if we let it, this could grow. The song ended and we stepped back, still smiling. I glanced at the window. The night sky beyond was speckled with faint but steady stars. The crowd's chatter grew louder, drawing me back, but the stars stayed with me. A quiet promise. Sophia nudged me and pointed to a friend who was waving us over. We laughed and moved towards the warmth of the room. The future was open and alive.